I think that what we need to really be talking about is how to just get informed that it can, this whole idea of wealth, whether it be investing or whether it be, whatever it looks like. But what can you do to actually open your eyes and take a real look at what's happening and learn how to make your own choices about things instead of defaulting or deferring to someone else?
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Mindful Wealth Podcast. We have with us today Nancy Levin, life coach, podcaster, and author of multiple books on building self-worth and financial power. And this season of Mindful Wealth, we're talking about women in wealth. And Nancy, this is why we reached out to you today. So tell us a little bit about your journey through life and what led you to be sitting here on the show with us today.
So thank you for having me, first of all. And, I am definitely a proponent of we teach what we need to learn. And my journey into this conversation of wealth comes from the place of first looking at self-worth and connecting for myself that self-worth and net worth were very intertwined. So the catch-22 for me was during my divorce mediation. And because I didn't have the self-worth to say no, I lost net worth. And I say catch-22 because it's one of those things that I would really not have been able to learn had I not gone through that experience. And it was really then I was able to look at that connection and see how different things would have been if I had been able to stand up for myself, how different things would have been if I had been able to say no. Also for me, the piece around self-responsibility. After the mediation, I was still using the language that, he took or I had to give. And the truth of the matter is everything shifted in me when I was able to come to the place of self-responsibility of I said yes to this, or, I agreed to this. And so that's sort of part of the framework of what really led me into wanting to explore self-worth and net worth.
Oof. Heavy. It's how we learn our most difficult lessons, right? Is through those personal tragedy, kind of traumatic experiences.
Yep.
Nancy, we talk about true wealth. People talk about fulfillment, well-being. We talk about true wealth as kind of that all-encompassing thing.
Yep.
What does that mean for you? How would you define what it takes to become truly wealthy?
Yeah. I mean, I also look at it in a holistic way. So it's not, it's like, it's about money, but it's not about money. So it is also about, what are the ways we define success in our own lives? Freedom, contentment, satisfaction, the way that we are resourced in terms of our energy or our time. So I look at all of that as well.
And what is a follow-up question? Like, what are some of the levers that people can pull on there? Like, obviously there's the financial aspect, but, you referenced a bunch of other things, contentment, the metrics we use for success.
Yeah.
What kind of things can people work with in order to feel more wealthy and not just financially?
Yeah. So I am also a big proponent of boundaries. I wrote a book called Setting Boundaries Will Set You Free. And I believe that boundaries really are the scaffolding that allow us to curate and create the life that we most want to live. So I believe that having really clear, healthy boundaries is what gives us time freedom or gives us energy freedom. And I believe that most of us are, we're often drained or overwhelmed or burned out because we don't have the healthy boundaries in place. So I do believe having really clear boundaries allows us to experience the true wealth.
So I'm going to deepen the follow-up a little bit here. So take someone like myself who has horrible boundaries. So you're in this place, you're overwhelmed all the time. You have just all kinds of stuff you have to do, lots of responsibilities, run a business, work full time, have a wife, have 2 kids. I don't think I'm unique in that, buddy.
Right.
How do you begin to set boundaries?
Yeah. So let me begin with defining boundaries the way that I work with them. Boundaries are the limits that we set around what we will or will not do, accept, or tolerate. So the way that we begin setting boundaries is first getting really clear on what is a priority for us. And, what's interesting about the word priority is it is a singular term that somehow turned into a plural. But when you pluralize priorities, it really dilutes the meaning. So we have to first begin with what is the clear priority. So what is the vision that we're holding where we want to focus first and foremost? And we let that be the guiding force for our choices and actions. So once we have that sort of clarity of what is the top priority and there will be sub priorities, but really what is the primary priority and what is the vision I'm holding, then we really want to make sure that we are using that as the gauge by which to measure the choices we make and the actions we take.
Are you thinking about this in like a macro or micro? Like I could.
Oh,
okay.
It's from the micro. I mean, it has to begin with the micro. So it has to begin with, very clearly looking at, where are you saying yes when you want to say no? Even, starting there, what are you saying yes to that you want to say no to? And it also goes into, how are you structuring your time? What are the time leaks? Especially if we work for ourselves or we work from home, there's a lot of blur. If you look at it from the aspect of, okay, I'm going to work these days, these hours, then what happens is if I'm outside of those bounds, I'm crossing my own boundaries. And that's really the most important point, is that if our boundaries are being crossed, we are the ones crossing them. So we all, say something like, other people are crossing our boundaries, and that's absolutely not true. We are the ones who are crossing the boundaries. So we have to really be steadfast and hold true to what works best for us in terms of time, in terms of space, in terms of taking time for ourselves, and recognizing that, we cannot say yes to everything, and that's a true road to burnout.
Okay. So when I have a long list of things that I would call a priority, right?
Right.
I just listed some of them: work, my family, little kids, those kinds of things.
Right.
So when I'm asking the question about micro versus macro, I guess, are you talking about time blocking? In other words, this hour, my micro priority is this thing, but throughout the day, and I don't know if this is you too, but I get 300 emails, I get, dozens of phone calls, so how do you, when the world is coming at you, how do you say?
Right. So here's the first thing I'll say is that other people's urgency doesn't need to be yours.
Oh, okay.
And yeah.
I have agency, you're saying? I don't know.
Right. Other people's urgency is not yours. And really, every single choice we make and every action we take does only one of two things. It serves our vision and our priority, or it sabotages our vision or priority. So if we
Stop. Say that one more time.
Sure.
Every single decision and choice we make.
Single choice, decision, action serves our priority and vision or sabotages our priority and vision, period. So what happens then is to look at, does this, will this serve or will this sabotage? And at least start becoming conscious of it. Even if you choose to do the sabotaging thing, don't do it unconsciously. Yeah.
This is the soundbite interview. Like, it's utilizing things like so clearly that I think like we kind of know this stuff, but you just make it so clear. And I'm like, if I could walk around with this phrase in top of mind all day long, like, man, would things ever change? Like, that urgency thing really hit home for
listen,
me.
I understand. I mean, I used to be famous for replying to an email before I even received it. And I really had to get to a place where understanding that not everything needs urgent attention and that I can actually make a choice. The other thing I'll say that has made a significant difference for me in my own life is really being very discerning and being boundaried about my mornings, for example. So I go to sleep with my phone in airplane mode. So when I wake up in the morning, there are no notifications on my phone. And I meditate and I journal before I ever put my phone back on Wi-Fi. So I have already spent time with myself, given myself what I need before I let the world in. And then I'm very particular about, what needs my attention first and how to structure my communication.
Makes me feel very privileged that we got through the the various firewalls.
Well, I mean, I respond to everything. I attend to everything. It's just that not everything needs immediate attention.
Right.
And I think, all of that wanting immediate gratification also kind of flips into feeling like we need to respond. And it also comes from people pleasing and fear of conflict and, all of these other sources that have us react in ways that aren't necessarily best for us.
I feel like I'm on the cusp of understanding this. Like throughout my life, and I'm in this place where I'm like, okay, I can actually pursue the things that are important to me. And that understanding, it hasn't actually translated into action yet. So what is this? Understanding is important.
Yep.
What are the scaffolding decisions or the scaffolding choices I can make that will push me over the edge? Say, you know what? I'm going to say no to this and this and this. I'm going to focus on this thing that's important to me.
Great. So first, we have to look at, we all have our own version of our knee-jerk yes. A request comes in and we say yes. And we do it out of obligation or responsibility, or we don't want someone else to be angry or disappointed. We do it because we want to be the hero. There's all these sorts of reasons we say yes.
I have all those reasons. All those reasons apply to me.
Of course. And the only real reason to say yes is desire. So if it's not a desire, it's a no. And what I will often work with clients around is, if a direct request comes in and you're not ready to say no, simply say, I'll get back to you tomorrow. Build in a pause so that you don't do the knee jerk and you actually get to consider, is this something I want to do? Does this serve or does this sabotage? Why am I saying yes? Why, all of this. And then to be able to say no with grace and with gratitude instead of excuses. We can simply say, thank you so much for thinking of me. I'm not available. Or I appreciate the invitation. It doesn't quite fit in with what my priorities are right now. And we don't need to do a song and a dance. We don't need to make up a story. We can simply say no. And that clarity also helps the people that we are interacting with trust us even more. Because if I'm honest with my no, then you can trust my yes. So that's one piece. The other piece is, and I don't know if this rings true for you, but I'll share it, is, so many of us are other referenced. So we're really focused on the people outside of us. What do they think? What do they want? What do they need? What do they feel? We're constantly tuning into, taking their temperature in order to know ours. So another piece here, and this is really sort of the boundary of our own thinking, to be able to come into, what do I think? What do I want? What do I need? What do I feel? Instead of having all of that attention go outward. So those are really the starting points. And that's, those are the things that will really have us take the action. And I'll add in as a follow-up, because it's something that often comes up when I talk about this, is, well, isn't it selfish? And I am on my soapbox about reclaiming selfishness, because I think we have given selfish a bad rap. I think we praise selflessness, and in selfless, we disappear. There's absolutely nothing wrong with really taking into account what we need and making sure that we have it. And when guilt arises in this context, I believe it is an indicator that we're on the right track.
I don't want to take us too far down this, but as you were speaking, there's something that struck me, and that is, there is no service without self.
Right.
Right. You're not giving. If you're selfless, you're not giving. You're just being trod upon. Right. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. If we just backpedal a little bit and talk about worthy in particular, because since we're talking about, women and wealth, just maybe flesh out for us the connection that you see there between this aspect of, self-worth and boundaries, and how that then translates into wealth. I think you alluded to that a little bit in your intro, but I wonder if you can just really spell that out for us a little bit more clearly.
Yeah. So if it also really links with our beliefs. So if we believe we are not enough or not good enough, we will also believe that there isn't enough and we won't have enough. These are very intertwined. And so when we allow ourselves to shift our own perception of enoughness and allow ourselves to shift into the place of self-confidence, which means self-acceptance, self-trust, all of this will ultimately be able to boost what is available to us. What I see with women in particular is we tend to already believe that there's a ceiling on our havingness. So we, in some ways, don't believe it's possible to receive more than we have. And because of that belief, we don't actually open ourselves to receiving any more. So we think that there is a limit. We think that life is a zero-sum game. If someone else has, I go without. If I have, someone else goes without. We really haven't learned to trust in the enoughness. And I don't want to go too woo-woo, but really the enoughness that there is enough. There is enough to go around. Even if we look at jealousy and envy, we often will have an experience of someone else has something and we feel jealous or we feel envious. And I also look at that as, if someone else has it, it means it's possible for me too. So just even these slight, mindset shifts and reframes around the way that we relate to what we have and what's possible to have. And can we actually open ourselves up to receiving? Because I think women are so trained to not want, that in turn, they're not trained in how to actually open up to receive.
Well, I mean, I think, if I'm kind of like listening and at the same time kind of correlating this with, my anecdotal perception. And, I wonder, I think it might be maybe not want for yourself, right?
Right.
Because
Correct.
I think like
Correct.
a lot of us like want a whole lot of things for the people around us. Like I'm
Right.
thinking,
I'm talking about
yeah,
wanting for yourself. Yes. Yes.
yeah,
Right.
And I think you mentioned in worthy that you have to, before you are worthy, you have to see yourself as worthy of abundance. You have to see yourself as. And do you think that's a gender difference? Is that what I hear?
In my experience, and I've coached, all different kinds of people, I definitely see that it is something that women tend to struggle with the most. And I think it comes from, this whole idea of the people pleasing or the peacekeeping or the conflict avoiding, or beliefs around, staying small or being invisible or being silent. Many women are not encouraged to be big and forceful and powerful and loud as children. They are encouraged to, zip it up.
There's an interesting, I don't know if it's quite a corollary, but there's a lot of research on male versus female confidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking specifically about decision making in the investment world.
Mm-hmm.
And men make decisions more quickly with less research, less intelligently, because of an overconfidence.
That's right.
And I'm wondering if I'll put myself in that category, our ability to be bigger and larger, because that training you just referenced as kids also leads to some stupidity and overconfidence, right? Some mistaken, but we feel good about it. And so we're able to express like, yeah, we know what we're doing. Just get out of our way. We'll do this thing. And that then translates into all kinds of different, moving forward, gender differences.
Yeah, it's true. It's very true. Whereas I think women tend to not trust themselves as much, second guess themselves. All of that is, part of the confidence equation too, or beat ourselves up, not to say that men don't. I mean, I don't want to go too, in that, but I think it's really more common and natural for women.
I guess it's the thing I'm trying to point at is it that women beat themselves up more, or that they beat themselves up the right amount and men don't beat themselves up enough?
I mean, I'm not advocating for anyone to beat themselves up. But I do think that that's sort of, my word, not yours, but that sort of false sense of confidence allows men to do things that many women don't allow themselves to do.
So I find that so interesting, because I was trained, I was taught early in my career to fake it till I made it.
Right.
And I absolutely knew that I did not have the skills. I absolutely knew, but I had to pretend.
Right.
Huh.
Yeah. And I will say, without even saying like men and women, I think it's also the strong masculine or the strong feminine. I definitely have a strong masculine. So I am definitely more of the, as much as I have my people pleaser and all that stuff, I'm definitely someone who will tell you I can do every single thing and then I'll figure it out later. So I think it's part of it is the wiring around the way we create the perception of ourselves for someone else.
Where do you think that you got that? Is that something that was natural to you, or do you think parents trained that, or where does that come from?
What I believe is, when I was born, I had a 2-year-old brother who was severely ill, and he died when I was 6.
Sorry.
And so thank you. So I know that so much of my drive is around self-preservation.
Mhm.
And so I certainly believe that, my independence, my sovereignty, all of that, my self-sufficiency, originated out of that point, because even though I couldn't, as a small child, I couldn't have thought this per se, but I know the belief that was formed was, better to have no needs because his are more important, or better to be self-sufficient so that I don't bother my parents because they need to put attention on him, or, whatever it might be. And even, better, if I am imperfect like he is, I will die. So, I really need to double down on my perfectionism. So I think all of those things are what sort of have had me uh, put myself out in a certain way into the world, creating a persona of, I can do everything.
No, but I think that's just so interesting because, there is obviously like the nature nurture debate. Anytime you talk about women, this is a huge subject, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's this business of, like, one thing is for sure is that the construction of the social personas that we function with is incredibly powerful. And like,
Yes.
I really think, that this business of like overconfidence, and like, I think it was, we just did a previous interview, maybe it was with Rebecca Walker, with Liza, I don't remember now. But there was this talking about how men have this incredible pressure to, be providers and be the source of solutions, and all these kind of different things, and that it forces them to create a social persona that's structured around that.
That's
Whereas
right.
us as women, it's more of this kind of self-effacing, thinking of other people's needs, like, don't be too loud, don't be
Right.
mean, don't do this,
Yep.
don't be selfish,
Yep.
and that leads us to be like more self-effacing, even if your gut reaction is not that,
Right.
and for someone who also has like a fairly strong like masculine personality, like for me, that's often been a thing where it's like, okay, but like there part of me wants to do something, but I'm like, no,
Right.
that's too much, stop.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yep. Yeah.
Oof. Um, I guess it's my turn, Terrie. Moment of silence. Okay. We just had this conversation, a different conversation actually, with Rebecca Walker, about narrative, story writing, redefining our relationships through these narratives with wealth, overcoming trauma. And I know you have a book coming up, or is it already released, or will it be released shortly?
I just got my advanced copy.
There we go. The Art of Change. Yes, yes,
The Art of
yes.
Change.
Is that
It's
what you're driving at there?
is that what I'm driving at? The Art of
The
Change?
narrative, the
Yeah. Yeah, very much. So it's a guided journal, actually. And the subtitle is 8 weeks to making a meaningful shift in your life. And the way it's presented is, there's sort of 8 dimensions of reinvention. And I look at reinvention as returning to the essence of who we are before we were taught to package ourselves to be digestible to others. And so this really gives us the opportunity to, through journal prompts, to be able to explore and excavate and understand and inquire and discover.
And so, follow-up question, like, what is so important about narrative? What is so special about narrative? Because again, in our conversation, we referenced the conversation with Rebecca Walker, but so she came out with a book that's really about, working through trauma
Mhm.
and rewriting your place, right? By reviewing some of the stories, the foundation stories we might have that are negative about us, or that we put a negative spin on. And, for
Right.
her, it's kind of like a feminist and like African American kind of power thing, where she looks at how people can write themselves back into the position in the story that serves them better, right?
Right.
And so, like, I'm curious, for you, I feel like there must be some kind of a special thing around
Yes.
narrative, but
Yeah.
how would you frame that?
Yeah. So, I mean, a couple of the uh, pillars that I'm working with in this book are looking at our beliefs, our limiting beliefs that are formed when we are under the age of 10. We are too young to process and digest what's happening. So we make events and circumstances mean something about us. So we draw conclusions about ourselves. So very much like what I was just sharing about my brother dying. And the conclusions I drew were, I need to be self-sufficient. I need to be perfect, because if I'm broken like he is, I'll die. All of these beliefs that I internalize, that then as I grow up, because our beliefs are magnetic, I am attracting toward me people, circumstances, relationships that corroborate and reinforce these beliefs. We have an idea that someone outside of us is going to change our beliefs, but we have to change our beliefs ourselves. Just like we have the idea that someone outside of us is going to, deem us worthy. And so we end up hitching our sense of worthiness to someone else's wagon. But the truth is that's all an inside job, because once we shift on the inside, then we will start to attract, what we now believe. So those beliefs are really the beginning of our narrative that we came by unconsciously. So part of shifting the narrative is, as an adult, being able to consciously create new beliefs and tie them to actions so that they're not simply words. And, sort of similarly, there's also a concept in the book that I talk quite a bit about in terms of our underlying commitments, also formed when we were under the age of 10. Most of us believe that we are most committed to what we say we want. However, if there is a discrepancy between what you say you want and what you're actually experiencing, the truth of the matter is you're more committed to something else that you may not even be aware of. And it may be some promise you formed in childhood, a coping mechanism or a survival strategy. So, for example, I had a client who was an amazing opera singer, but every time she got on stage, she got stage fright. She couldn't even sing. We were able to work through all of that, go all the way back to childhood, traumatic events, and the belief, this commitment to staying silent is what kept her safe and out of harm from her father. So these underlying commitments really serve us as children, but they become the seeds of our self-sabotage as we grow. So these are the kind of these are the narratives that we are untangling so that we can really be conscious about our lives moving forward instead of just defaulting to the past unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
So just peeling it apart a little bit, I'm getting a sense, and I should just say that I live in Berkeley, California.
Yeah.
So I fall very left of center.
Yeah.
And I'm getting a sense from the conversation right now that there's a lot of it's a lot of your responsibility to overcome whatever your situation is. And I believe that. I do believe that. But is there a place for within that to say, you know what? Some stuff is unfair. In some cases, I am being prevented from improving, becoming, or is it really just all an internal game? I don't mean game in a negative way. I shouldn't say game. Apologize.
So what I believe is that if we stay in a mode of blame and victimhood, we actually don't allow, we're suppressing our own power to take responsibility. Because now, obviously, there are exceptions. abuse, especially for children. I mean, if we look at systemic racism, if we look at, there are lots, I mean, there are, I would say I'm more talking about sort of quote unquote garden variety life. There are always going to be extremes. There are always going to be exceptions. But I do believe that the real work and the freedom comes from taking responsibility instead of staying in the role of victim. And I also believe we can do far more than we give ourselves credit for. I believe we can change our lives far more than we think we can.
That was a tough question, Jonathan. I wouldn't have wanted to be on the receiving end of that one.
She handled it perfectly. I mean, I think that I totally agree. I think that our outcomes will be better if we do take responsibility. And I can't say that as well because I am white, male, middle-aged, 6'5". I have every advantage.
Right.
So when I say that, it's like it's interpreted as, let's make sure these people get their stuff together. And that's not what you said it, like you suppress your own ability. If you're a victim and you believe in that, you suppress your own ability to overcome.
I believe that to be true.
Beautiful. Yeah.
I do.
So let's just, tack back a little bit to women and wealth. And, there's a lot of angles that one can take that from. So, we mentioned earlier, there's the, unpaid labor in the home or the wage gap or, the equity and wealth gap. There's a lot of different things. In your opinion, what's the main area or the one thing that you think more women could focus on that would begin to bridge the wealth gap, be it, in well-being or in finance or something else? What do you think is the one thing we should be talking about?
Being informed. That's something that I really, I think many women, I don't want to say all, but like many women don't really know about their finances or don't really know, don't partake in certain aspects of it or still have to ask permission for spending or, whatever the construct might be. And I think that there's also the idea of sort of turning a blind eye or putting on the blinders about certain aspects. So I think that what we need to really be talking about is how to just get informed that it can, this whole idea of wealth, whether it be investing or whether it be, whatever it looks like, but what can you do to actually open your eyes and take a real look at what's happening and learn how to make your own choices about things instead of defaulting or deferring to someone else. And I do think that in there comes this conversation we were having before. What are the beliefs you have about yourself and money? What are the messages? What are the ways you're holding yourself back from having more? If you grew up with, your parents talking about, rich people are greedy or rich, people with a lot of money are bad or, whatever, you're going to have that imprint and you're going to, unconsciously keep yourself down. Even I was coaching a client who grew up very, very poor. She was stepping into making a lot of money. And what she came to realize was her fear about making a lot of money was that all of her family would come out of the woodwork and have an expectation that she would then support them. And that was what was holding her back from earning more. So all of these things are very insidious. But I think that, educating ourselves, informing ourselves, understanding, instead of just like, oh, I don't understand money. Yeah.
I think that's really, really great advice. And I think maybe again, this social persona that we are kind of socialized into projecting, where maybe it's kind of not our job to be the provider or whatever. But I mean, I certainly know a lot of men as well who would be well served by educating themselves a little bit
Yeah,
more about what they're
certainly.
doing financially, and
Certainly.
and just being more informed in general,
Yeah.
as opposed to deferring to other people to make decisions. I think that's really great advice.
Do you see, I'm curious if you see in generations a shift in this. I mean, in my work, I see a shift.
For
I
sure.
have 80-year-old clients who the man has made all the decisions. The woman is just pleased. I just to make a decision. It has no interest at all in
Right.
even attending the conversation. And I'm pulling teeth to get her to come and maybe ask a question.
Mhm.
Whereas younger generation, 35, 40-year-old clients, it's not quite role reversal, but women are actually a lot more interested in learning and figuring it out and being a more dominant actually participant in the
Yeah.
conversation around money. Do you sense
Yeah.
that too?
Yes. And then I'm even, I even see this, in my niece and nephew. My niece is 21 and my nephew's 17. And I even see it with them. My nephew is incredibly entrepreneurial. He's a musician, and he's like really like he is really into, not necessarily into money, but into like understanding how this all works. And if I do this gig, I'm going to get this much, and then I've got to pay the other musicians this much. And, he's really into it. And my niece and I were just traveling, and even just the sort of like, I love this thing, but do I love it enough to buy it? Or, even just having an awareness of what money is, which is, I will be the first to say, I really didn't grow up knowing what money was. I mean, it just was, but I didn't really learn about it from my parents. I didn't really, until I was in my 20s, probably even really get what the deal was.
So do you have any resources, someone that came to that conversation later in life, do you have any resources you relied upon that say, hey, this is where I learned?
Yeah. I'll be honest. I was very fortunate to work with Susie Orman when I was in my position at Hay House. So I have definitely learned quite a lot from her, and she really does speak to women. Yeah.
Yep. And she has, I don't know, half a dozen books more.
She definitely does. There's also someone else that I would recommend. Her name is Barry Tesler, and she wrote a book, Barry. Okay.
Oh
So
yeah.
she wrote a book, called The Art of Money.
Yep.
And she has a new workbook that just came out. And I love that she takes a financial therapy approach. She's a dear friend, and that it's a very somatic approach to money. And I think that is also incredibly helpful.
Yeah. I think she basically started financial therapy
She
in
did.
the US. She's the founder of the idea.
She is.
Yep.
She and her husband actually came up with that term. Yep.
There's also, in this world of all female financial empowerment, how can I help? How can men help? What can we do? I think I find myself pushing all the time. Hey, learn more, do this. I built courses, I wrote a book, hey, do this, try, and not always received with all that much interest. So I'm curious, what else can I do, both for women in my life and then for just women in our culture?
I think part of it is staying in the sort of invitation mode, and instead of it being a power play. Not that I'm saying that you would be approaching it that way, but I think that if women are invited to look at something and make decisions and really consider, it comes across differently than, let me say it this way. What I think happens is we want to be able to feel like we can give ourselves permission to have. That's one thing. Permission to want for ourselves and have, and not feel like we have to ask or get approval. But I think that that's a deeper piece for women than it just being about money.
You know what? It's really striking because every single guest we've had on this season had said that exact same thing. About being invited to the table. And I think that's very true. And, so I have a background in martial arts, and like one of the courses that I followed at one point was the differences of coaching male athletes and female athletes. And there's a huge attrition rate of female athletes as they go through puberty. And one of the things that they point at is they say that when you bring women into like a kind of a competitive sports space, they want to first feel included in the group before they begin to compete with one another. Yeah. And I think that in terms of the way financial education happens, and certainly I know like in the real estate field where I am, it's like the guys come in and they start like kind of playing the game of who's got more, who did better, who did this, who did that. And so this learning space becomes a space of establishing a hierarchy, as opposed to one where we all feel like we can just comfortably sit down at the table and like have a conversation with each other. Yeah. And I think that like in terms of like, traditionally like male and female modes, again, you can't fully map it onto men and women.
Right.
There's a real thing with this, that if you begin the conversation with like, bragging and establishing hierarchy, that's going to maybe alienate women to feel like I'm going to just, be quiet and be in myself if I don't get up and like slowly sneak out of the room. So
right. Right.
So Nancy, this has been really a wonderful conversation. We're kind of running out of time a little bit. I wonder if you want to just tell our audience where they can find you and what's the best way to connect with you.
Certainly. Thank you. Everything is on my website, nancylevin.com. And I have, as you mentioned earlier, I've got a podcast. I have a coach training and certification academy. And I also have a biweekly newsletter that your audience might be interested in. It's specifically for coaches. However, I do talk a lot about building businesses, making money, how to create abundance, doing what you love.
Thanks, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for this interview. Bye-bye.